Hello, this is Brian from the Bad Manners podcast. I'm going to be reacting to a video that asks, is Tucker Carlson woke? It's an interesting question. I like Nick Freitas a lot. If you're not already supporting him, please do so. Like, comment, subscribe to his videos. I'm not a fan of infighting among anybody remotely to the conservative side of the spectrum. Having strong disagreements is natural and welcome, and those are discussions to be had. So I am curious to see where this goes, given what little, admittedly, I know about Nick Freitas. I only know what I know from videos. I don't believe this is meant to be any kind of attack. If anything, I expected this to go to a humorous way, but let's see what happens.
All right, let's go to the last person that we're going to address right here, and that is Tucker Carlson. And so I'm going to show you some clips here, and again, the argument is going to be that I'm just picking on Tucker Carlson, or I'm selectively editing stuff. I'm going to show you a clip that he was very proud of, and I'm going to show you a clip that he's probably not as proud of. But we're just going to analyze the way that he's assessing things. Okay, so that's all we're doing here. I'm not asking anybody to hate Tucker Carlson. I just want to bring something up that I think is relevant and important. All right, so this is the how many people live in Iran question that he asked to Ted Cruz.
People live in Iran, by the way. I don't know the population at all. No, I don't know the population. You don't know the population of the country you seek to topple? What's the ethnic mix of Iran?
They are Persians and predominantly Shia. Okay,
it's not even. You don't know anything about Iran. So
okay, I am not the Tucker Carlson expert on Iran.
You're a senator who's calling for the overthrow of the government. You're the one who don't know anything about the country.
No, you don't know anything about the country.
Republicans are
okay. So that was a commonly shared clip, and a lot of people were depending on how you viewed this. Some people were saying that Tucker did a real kind of gotcha thing with Ted Cruz. And the other side would say, well, no, if Ted Cruz actually wants to advocate regime change in Iran, he should know basic things about the population, the ethnic breakdown, because that's all going to factor in whether or not this is actually possible. And I would say that that's a good point. Now the question is for Tucker to then conclude because you don't know, first of all, he asked him the population, he said he didn't know. Now, I'm sure if he guessed, he would probably have made it within, I don't know, maybe 10 or 20% of what the population was, but I don't know that, right? But Tucker had just looked it up because Tucker knew he was going to ask the question. And then Tucker starts to talk about the ethnic breakdown. And Ted Cruz begins to say, well, it's predominantly Persian, predominantly Shia. And then at that point, Tucker interrupts him. Now, understand something. What Ted Cruz was saying in that moment was not incorrect. It is predominantly Persian. It's about 60% Persian. And it is predominantly Shia Islam. But Tucker then interrupts him and says, you want to topple this country, you don't know anything about it. Okay.
My one immediate interjection I have here is knowing things such as the total population of a country is more along the lines of a factoid than something that is materially relevant given the current situation that's going on between U.S., Israel, and Iran. As far as the ethnic composition of Iran, that too is of less importance given that you can only judge the country chiefly based on what its officially stated government positions are, because those are the people sitting at the top of those hierarchies of power. So even if you have ethnic groups within Iran that may be opposed to the existing power structure, it doesn't change the fact that the outcomes are going to be dictated by those that wield the power.
Okay, well, Tucker hadn't proven that case because Ted Cruz didn't off the top of his head know the actual population numbers or the complete ethnic breakdown of Iran doesn't mean he doesn't know anything about Iran. And it certainly doesn't mean that he doesn't know anything about the Islamic regime and what it's been doing to the region and to the United States since 1979.
Yeah. Nick is clearly correct on this. What matters most is those who have the power over the population and what they do with said power. And that's where it begins to concern countries outside of Iran. So I'm not a big fan of Ted Cruz, but on this one, it's hard to see how this is in any way a slam dunk on him.
And this is the part that frustrates me with respect to Tucker on some of these questions that he asks, is that he goes very, very hard on someone that, quite frankly, probably agrees with Tucker about 70% of the time. But then he'll bring on somebody else who may disagree with him a lot, who may have wildly different objectives for how to run society than Tucker Carlson. But provided that whoever the guest is,
You know, he actually is hinting at something that, and in my opinion, this is part of the reason leftists have been allowed to advance as far as they are. When it comes to people on the right dealing with each other, we will grill each other infinitely harder over minute details than we will on those on the left. In fact, there's almost this tendency among many on the right to kind of just give the left their soapbox to say as they will, and then try to establish at least some degree of commonality between, the right and the left, so that you can have some sort of feeling that you're bonding with your fellow man or something. But in terms of actually advancing the ideological discussion and trying to move it in a way that it becomes more clear that those on the right are correct or anything to that effect, you just get stuck in the situation where an individual like Tucker Carlson, and I have seen some of these interviews, he'll sit down with somebody who clearly disagrees with him on a great deal, and it becomes very soft, relatively speaking, compared to how, for example, Ted Cruz gets treated there.
Agrees with Tucker on Israel or the Jews or Winston Churchill, all of a sudden that person doesn't get any tough questions. And I want to juxtapose this with an interview that was done with Mike Huckabee, where all of a sudden Mike Huckabee kind of got the best of Tucker Carlson. So let's go ahead and take a look at this right now. This is a little bit longer. Oh, sorry, volume.
Christians are not doing very well. They're not doing very well in the Muslim-controlled countries. There's almost no Christians in Qatar, for example, except those who live in the Christian ghetto, who are the service workers.
I'm sorry. And look, I don't want to argue with you. There are many more Christians in Qatar than there are in Israel.
That's not true.
Even if there were more there than in Israel, it doesn't undermine the reality that Christians in any Muslim country are second-class citizens at best. They are not respected by those in power beyond that minimum level of respect required by the Quran.
Well, it actually is true. And I refer you to Wikipedia, Mr. Ambassador.
Wikipedia,
I refer you to the government of Qatar.
Okay, this is the part too that drives me a little bit nuts. He refers him to Wikipedia. Now, listen, I use Wikipedia for stuff, but I'm not going to come to my final conclusion about something. The way I typically use Wikipedia is I'll look at what it has to say because it generally does a good summary of things, but I always know it's coming from a left-wing bias. And how do I know that? Because I've talked to the co-founder of Wikipedia, who is adamant about Wikipedia basically engaging in ideological capture, that it's become intellectually dishonest. The reason why it still has some value is that to the extent that you can look at summaries of things, and then it provides links to where that information came from, so you can check original sources. But for Tucker to honestly, well, just check Wikipedia. And then he'll say, well, and you can see Mike Huckabee going, Wikipedia? Like, we all know this is owned by the left wing.
When I was first going to college in the 2000s, Wikipedia was just considered unreliable because you didn't know who was curating the information. Amusingly, now in the 2020s, you have this situation where it acquired a certain degree of respectability for a time, and now, well, we know it's not to be respected because, yes, it has been ideologically captured. One thing worth pointing out in that back and forth between Huckabee and Carlson is simply Israel is not a Christian country. Qatar, of course, is not a Christian country. The people of both countries adhere to, Judaism and Islam respectively. They're naturally going to move and take actions in a vein that benefits their in-group. So they're not necessarily they're not going to be acting in the best interests of Christians to begin with. Both can be generally opposed to the interests of Christianity if Christianity is something important to you. So why you would be deliberating over which one is worth? Neither one is good if you're concerned with it from the Christian angle.
And then, we'll check with the government of Qatar. The government of Qatar has nice things to say about the government of Qatar. Can you imagine Huckabee looking back at Tucker Carlson and say, well, just check with the government of Israel? Tucker wouldn't accept that. But he does accept Wikipedia when it reinforces what he wants, and he accepts the government of Qatar when it reinforces what he wants. But this is the part that Tucker really gets kind of slammed with.
The government of Israel, these are knowable facts. I'm in Jordan, by the way,
numbers are down. In Syria, the numbers are down. In Lebanon, the numbers are down.
There
I'm just
are
telling you that
about twice as many Christians.
but they live in the enclave. They are not native Qataris.
Okay, we're mixing so many different categories here. I'm just saying I get things wrong all the time. You've just gotten something wrong, and I think it's important to acknowledge it. There are many more Christians in Qatar than there are in Israel. Fact.
How many?
Now you caught me. I don't know. I can look at my phone, but I was just there, and there are many more. Whatever.
Yeah, you see that? It was
Going into finite numbers like that, and actually, one side note, wonderful clip selection from Nick on this one. Yeah, this is proof that knowing certain factoids, like the precise number of how much something has, unless it's materially consequential to what's occurring, it's irrelevant information. In fact, it comes off as trivia one-upsmanship. So Carlson doing it with the Iran question to Cruz, Huckabee doing it to Carlson. It is kind of a turnabout is fair play sort of deal, but it should have never been materially relevant. If you're an American watching this or any student of history, then you should know from the historical interactions between these different religious groups. While the three of them might have some commonalities in various ways, they are not allied with each other. They're looking out for their own interests. There is a tendency among Christians to try to have this universalist feel that we're looking out for everybody. Islam and Judaism does not have Christianity's best interest in mind and never will. They're advancing the cause of their own people and the ideology they hold dear.
I guess using Tucker's logic, Mike Huckabee could then go back and say, you claim to know about Christians in the Middle East, but you don't even know anything about it, Tucker. Like, would it have been fair for Mike Huckabee to now do to Tucker Carlson what Tucker Carlson did to Ted Cruz? Right? If we're being intellectually honest, the answer would be yes. Because one of the things that Huckabee was pointing out here is there's a big difference between Qatar or the UAE or other countries in the Middle East, which have a vast foreign population. Many of them come from the Philippines. Many of them come from other countries in Southeast Asia or whatnot, where they might have different religious beliefs, or they might have Christian beliefs. Again, especially if they come from Philippines, where we have a large Catholic population. And they come into Qatar, and they live in little areas which are specifically for service workers. And in those areas, they're allowed to have churches. But if they leave that area and they attempt to proselytize, if they attempt to find a church, there is none. It's against the law. And the fact that Tucker Carlson is essentially accepting this narrative from Qatar, which, by the way, spends billions on lobbying the United States government, billions on influencing higher ed within the United States and around the world.
You would think an individual like Tucker Carlson would know better than to assume that these outgroups, because that's what they are by virtue of not being, American or concerned with anything that is conserving that which is traditionally American. You would think that you would be treating them with a healthy dose of skepticism, and he should have some awareness of history to know that Islam, as it concerns diplomatic relations, is not required to act in an ethical or honest manner. Or even if you remove the Islam side of the equation, naturally they're going to present all information in a way that's favorable to them. You only begin to shape this understanding of why you should be skeptical and looking at the history of how Islam has conducted itself in interreligious or interethnic ways.
The fact that he would accept this narrative, because Tucker is smart enough to know better. He knows that there's not like some large Qatari Christian population where they can go to church or they can engage in evangelism or they can do any of that stuff. Basically, if you're a Christian in Israel, you can be a Christian in Israel. This idea that Christians are just horribly persecuted in Israel, I'm sorry, that's just not factual. That's not factual. But if you're a Christian and you try to go out and like proselytize in Iraq or in Saudi Arabia. Like, that's against the law. You can face very, very serious penalties for that. And
Islam does take a far more hardline approach to dealing with Christian proselytizing. That much is true. But of course, once you understand how their religions function, Judaism is not big on proselytizing themselves, whereas Islam is very much about proselytizing themselves. It becomes clear why Islam actively discourages it by threat of force as necessary, and Judaism is less concerned with the question.
Tucker is pretending like that doesn't happen or that doesn't exist. The other thing Tucker has started in on is this whole idea, and it's similar with Fuentes and it's similar with Candace, but it's the whole idea of Israel explains everything, or the Jews explain everything.
Those that think that that one singular group explains everything, it is true, that group may have a significant amount of power. Sure. Every group on this planet is operating in their own self-interest. So to attempt to put this monofocus on one group and ignore the fact all the other groups are engaged in the exact same proclivity because it's natural. I mean, as an individual, you advance your own cause. Naturally, as collectives, various groups are going to advance their own cause. There's nothing inherently wrong in that. In fact, you should argue that it's a good thing. The main concern should be, and this is one of the reasons I don't like attacking people on the right, is my only concern is forming an alliance with people that are concerned with what is best for Americans. And any other question outside of that becomes irrelevant. So even if I might agree with the Fuentes types, etc., on various specific details, not interested in attacking them.
And again, I'm going to juxtapose this with somebody else here in a minute. Anybody that has I have regularly defended Thomas Massey. I don't think Thomas Massey should be primaried. I don't.
This makes me like Nick all the more.
Think that Donald Trump should be going after Thomas Massey the way he is. I just don't. That's not because I agree with Thomas Massey on everything. We disagree on some stuff, and we've had conversations about it before. But by the same token, usually when Massey talks about things, I understand the logic that he's using, and he's very intellectually consistent. Now, I get a little frustrated with Thomas Massey when I think he overemphasizes one point while seemingly ignoring others. But in the end, I can bring that point up to Thomas Massey, and provided that I present evidence, he will say, okay, yeah, I accept that, or I concede that particular point. I'm looking at Tucker Carlson. He's not conceding any points here, or at least it doesn't appear to be. And when you're not willing to acknowledge the verifiable fact that in most of the places in the Middle East, they've eradicated most of their Jewish populations, and they've allowed for the systematic destruction of Christian populations. But then you want to put all the emphasis on Israel as being really, really hostile to Christianity, when, again, I've been there. That certainly wasn't my experience. It's not the experience of the Christians I know who live in Israel. And so I look at Tucker, I'm like, what is the deal here? But again, it all has to go back to Israel explains everything. And that's not to say that Israel doesn't have influence on our foreign policy. I believe that they do. It's not to say they don't have influence in other aspects. I believe that they do. I believe other countries do as well, based off of the amount of money they spend in lobbying in the United States. And anybody that wants to say, I'm uncomfortable with this, cool. But Israel explains everything, or the Jews explain everything, has become the right-wing equivalent of anything I don't agree with is racist.
It is a pervasive form of intellectual laziness. And it takes on a sort of religious connotation because you have a one-size-fits-all answer to everything. And there's a kind of comfort and sense of security in feeling like you've got an answer for everything. But the truth is, other than advocating for your own self-interest and bonding together with other people that share a similar outlook and would like to shape your nation around a particular identity, there's not much you can do. You can just have an awareness that all these other groups, they're absolutely advocating for their own and doing their best to get what they can for themselves, and to make sure you're on guard against that. And yeah, so if a person is being sympathetic, as Carlson is, to Qatar in this case, but only noticing that, for example, Israel is operating in their interest, well, then you're ignoring part of the problem. On the other hand, if you're somebody that thinks that only Islam is the problem and that Israel is not acting, and then you believe that Israel is not acting in ways that aren't conducive to American interests, you are also part of the problem. People need to dispense with this naivete that's really come about in the post-World War II era, that everybody's generally all looking for the same things across humanity. And due to this extant Pax Americana that people in Western civilization have got to enjoy, especially since the fall of the USSR, people have just lost the realization that you can't look out for everybody, because the moment you're trying to look out for everybody is they become only concerned with enriching themselves, so they will extract all they can from you while you're still trying to look after everybody. So it becomes a case of them exploiting your principles for their maximum gain. And there's a discussion to be had on whether you should adhere to principles if they're self-destructive, but that's a different topic for a different time.
Anything I don't agree with is sexist. Do you see what I mean? Like, I'm watching it being used. I'm watching what I have always seen as a left-wing argument now being used by prominent members on the right, but for very specific topics. And Israel's become one of them. And I'll give you a perfect example of this. I have done episodes where I've said I am critical of Israel on this and this and this, but I generally support what they're doing here, here, and here. And the answer is, well, Nick, I don't think I don't think this is an appropriate position to take on this point, but I concede this point. Or Nick, I don't think you're giving enough weight to this problem that happened over here with Israel, like the USS Liberty or something like that. And I'll say, okay, well, no, that's not what I get. What I get is, oh, you've been paid off. So you see what I mean? Like, the standard is not evidence. The standard is, if you don't fit in my camp, which uses Israel or the Jews to explain everything, then you're a bad guy.
Again, the fundamental root of that is intellectual laziness, or you could think of it as intellectual rigidity. And it does seem odd to say there is a time and place for intellectual rigidity if you are dealing with somebody that is in fact your enemy. Like, for example, intellectual rigidity is appropriate when dealing with any flavor of leftism in your country that would meaningfully shape the control of how your people would lead itself to posterity, for themselves and their posterity. But beyond that, nuanced discussions allow for the possibility that the interests of different groups can dovetail. And what I mean by that is, there would certainly be times when the United States and Israel have a common interest that could be worked together on. That would be nuance. Similarly, there are certainly times that the United States could work with a Muslim country on something that is a mutually beneficial interest. There are benefits to be had from having nuanced considerations of what's going on or what's trying to be achieved. And it might benefit you to engage with those other nations that you should rightly be skeptical of because they are acting in their own self-interest. But that cooperation can lead to benefits for the people. So up to this point, I greatly appreciate that Nick is showing this level of appreciation of nuance, because he seems like the type of man that, if given the power to lead, would be able to approach these situations tactfully.
And I don't care that you agree with me on the Second Amendment or taxes or immigration or foreign wars. I don't care that you agree with me on wanting to reduce the size of the federal government or cut out federal bureaucracy. I don't care that you agree with me on abortion. I don't care that you agree with me that transing the kids is bad. No. If you don't agree with me on this topic right here around Israel or the Jews, then you're my enemy. And I see this becoming more and more prominent with certain members on the right. And the moment I see it, my immediate thing is, I'm going to disregard that. Right? When Thomas Massey says, I have a problem with what I think Israel did in this situation, I'm like, okay, good, let's analyze that. I might disagree with you, I might agree with you, but let's analyze it. But when I see the immediate, the instantaneous, nope, you don't associate all the world's problems here, or you don't associate a sufficient amount of the world's problems here, therefore you are my enemy, and I don't care what you believe about anything else. I'm like, yes, I recognize this. It's usually used on the left.
Well, I have been up to this point critical of the intellectual laziness or rigidity that can be associated with blaming one group for absolutely everything. It must be noted that it is a very natural response, and here is where I am sympathetic to those individuals that take this stance that Israel is the answer. And the only reason I have sympathy towards that end is because they never see an example of American leadership bucking Israel. So you could view it as they are just simply frustrated at this point. And that frustration results in lashing out at even people that would otherwise be your allies. Because, well, no two countries can have their interests converge at all times. And they are within reason if they are to think that, well, up to this point, how often has the United States gone against something that was beneficial to Israel? That track record's not very good. So yes, it is understandable why they're coming at it from that position. I don't like that kind of rigidity because it denies the possibility that there are times when it is beneficial to both parties. But also, given that that country is allowed to lobby our politicians and not be registered as foreign agents, there are definitely reasons for their stance. The thing I would hope between those types and the types like myself and apparently Nick that prefer the more nuanced approach is I don't think there needs to actually be a division there. I still think both sides can work together to accomplish the advancement of the American people. Because as far as I'm concerned, I don't actually care about Israel. I don't care about Qatar. May everybody else do fantastic. All I care about is the advancement of the American people and leaving something better to the future generations than what we got to have. Anything else is a distraction from that reality. And it only emboldens the left because when the right can't agree on forming an alliance when they actually are in agreement over the vast majority of topics, how can a fractured right ever pose a meaningful threat to a left that their principle of pursuing power is always in alignment?
Now let's do a juxtapose on this, specifically to the war in Iran, because obviously Dave Smith, Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, all of them very, very much against the war in Iran. But then they were so against it, they almost end up defending the Iranian regime. And I'm like, wait a second. You can absolutely believe that the United States should not be over there while still acknowledging that Iran has a horrific...
So the video is about to end there. I guess the point hadn't been brought up to this point. I am not a fan of anything going on in Iran. Yes, clearly, the Iranian regime is a force for evil in the world. No doubt about it. And the concern, of course, is that they get a nuclear weapon. And that because they've said things like death to America, that it becomes an immediate existential threat that requires our addressing. The only reason that I think that rhetoric is not particularly impressive is we've already faced that saber rattling for quite some time from North Korea. And Iran has the same issue that North Korea has. Their technology can't hit us here. Now, that's not to say they couldn't eventually hit us here. But the way it ends up ultimately looking like is that this regional conflict between Israel and Iran could hit Israel, which makes it a much more problematic affair for them. So the real question becomes, should we be expending American resources on securing Israel? And that's a difficult question. I had a polling place recently ask me about where my support for Israel currently stood in this ongoing Iran conflict. And it was probably an AI chatbot or something, given the responses. But the case I laid out is I feel that Israel should absolutely be able to do whatever it feels is appropriate for their people. 100% have at it. Because as I also told what was probably the chatbot that named itself Alice, that conflict is going to be going on until the end of time. You have two very different ideologies in close proximity. And one of those ideologies is blatantly expansionist. I know some would argue that Israel is expansionist in its own ways too. But if that's the case, then you have two expansionist ideologies seeking regional supremacy. Well, it's to be assumed that Israel has nukes. That's commonly understood. If Iran gets one, it becomes a threat to Israel. So this is about regional supremacy, and I don't know how much that getting involved over there is materially beneficial to the American people. And I side on the side that it is not materially beneficial to us. We don't need to be stamping out anybody that claims that they're evil or that they just don't like us, just because of the mere prospect that they might acquire technology at some point. This could be naive. They could deliver on the death to America thing because they are that suicidal that they would launch a nuke against somebody that will wipe them from the face of the earth for all time. Somehow I doubt, despite the obvious evils of that particular theocracy, that they are that keen to get wiped off the face of the earth. Don't really see it. For similar reasons, North Korea's saber rattling rings hollow for the same. So, my position on this, those on the right, we are far more harsh to each other than we tend to be on people facing the left, because we already understand the left is the enemy and there's nothing really to discuss there. I do wish that if people were going to sit down with people obviously of a leftist persuasion, or they're representing outside groups, that they would be harder with them and less inclined to establish a sense of commonality that isn't really shared. Because doing so provides the left with an image of credibility that they do not deserve in any particular manner. Aside from that, Nick is a man that probably would make a fantastic president, and if he ever ends up running, I would be fascinated in seeing somebody more likely to garner my support. He is well-reasoned, he is balanced in his approach, he is not disposed to rigid thinking, and that kind of fluidity, in my opinion, is important for a leader. You have your principles, but when it comes to the situations before you're able to adapt as necessary. So, as I stated earlier, please support him. Other than that, if you liked anything I had to say, like, comment, subscribe, etc. Have a good night.